I'd like to speak in non-specifics, like this. Many years ago, I could say once upon a time, but many years ago, the members and leaders of this Dharma Center took a trip to India, one of many. And on that trip, there was a specific question that we wanted to ask our truly worthy, esteemed teacher, Bokar Rinpoche. We wanted to ask him a question about two possibilities. One was that we could expand the Dharma Center, much in the way that this building is an example of an expansion of the Dharma Center. And so we asked him if we should do that, or if we should instead build facilities and conduct a long retreat. Long retreat meaning a little over 3 years. And his answer in short was, do the retreat. Not everyone was in agreement on that. Even after Bokar Rinpoche said that was there, not everyone considered it to be a done deal at that point. But it became a done deal, and we worked very hard. Many years of intense planning and building and raising money, a lot of money, to build the facilities. And the pain of it, of course, working, as human beings together, things don't always work out pleasantly, but they worked out. And when it looked not so good, we continued anyway. So, to chop off a chunk of it, here we are. And a long retreat is just about to come to a conclusion. And the aspirants who entered the retreat, who went from the beginning to the end, will come out of a cloistered environment on June 16th at SCOL in Goldendale, Washington. There is a tradition that is probably taken somewhat seriously by most of the Dharma lineages from Tibet. And that tradition is that when you complete a long retreat and the prerequisites and all of the pieces that are required are finished, then the people who exit that retreat leave with the title of Lama. Kala Rinpoche, who is the founder of KCC, all the way back in the 70s, was the inspiration for one retreat then. And near the end of that retreat, he sent a short recording to the retreatants. And he said on that recording, when the retreat is over, all of you will exit the retreat, you will all have the title Lama. However, quote, but we'll see in time who the actual lamas are. So that became clear that was Kala Rinpoche's equivalent of a final exam that would take place over some unspecified period of time, definitely in years. So that the title Lama was kind of an empty container. And over time, kind of like a vase that holds flowers. Some vases hold beautiful flowers. Some vases hold flowers that live a long time. Other vases hold flowers that die right away. And so on. So this is actually the tradition, is that people go on a long retreat. They come out of the long retreat. They are considered lamas sort of like you have an empty vase. And you're not exactly sure what's going to be put into it and what will stay there and how good it will be or not. And so we wanted to manage things in a way that would be the most fruitful for everyone. Not just the retreatants coming out, but also the Sangha into which some of those retreatants will go and stay. In other words, there is a mutual responsibility. We might have some expectation of the people coming out of retreat. And indeed, it's fair to say that they have some responsibility to deliver the goods, as it were. However, we also have, in a certain way, an even more daunting responsibility. And this is more like your garden. You could buy beautiful seeds in the sense that they're beautiful to look at, and the picture on the package is really quite beautiful. But if you do not know how to plant those seeds and care for them, you will not get the result. So, at least in one sense, this is an apt analogy or example. When those retreatants come out, from the retreatants' perspective, they need a lot of space. Having been in a cloister for over 3 years, you cannot imagine some of the things that they went through. And they're not particularly anxious to come out of retreat and face the expectations of people outside of the retreat. Of the many analogies that went through my mind, say one of them was, you just got a PhD in medicine, and suddenly you're required to do brain surgery. It's an unfair request, and one that is certain to bring more problems than answers. The analogy is somewhat apropos. You go and study for a long time like we did in college. Most of us, when we graduated, didn't know what the hell we were going to do. Some of us still don't. So we set about to provide some help in both directions here. One is, we will have a celebration at SCOL on June 16th, and Kempo Rinpoche will be there to officiate in some way. So it may not be that he officiates, but it may be that he does most of the officiating. We're not actually sure what's going to happen there, but he will be there. And you're all invited to come to that and see it. It's the only celebration that will occur. In other words, there's a celebration there. They've been behind a closed wall for this period. The gates to that cloister will be opened, and they will come out, and they will walk around the entire compound that is circumscribed by where the cloister is. And that ceremony, which will take about an hour and a half altogether, is the only ceremony that will happen. In other words, we will not come back here and celebrate again and celebrate again and celebrate again. We will celebrate one time. And then, once they're out, it's finished. Following that, our job, both the retreatants and the Sangha's job, is to normalize what has happened. In other words, ideally, going on a long retreat would not be so special. Kind of like you go on a picnic, it's nice, but it's not particularly special, unless you are 5 years old and you've never been on a picnic. So in a certain sense, we're all 5 years old, we haven't been on a picnic, and we want to see what these people look like. Do they still look like human beings? You know, do they have tails and ears and things? Like, what is this thing? So you get one chance to look, and then the retreatants all know that it will be a trying situation. I don't think a single one of them is looking forward to it. It's kind of in the genre of, I know I have to do this, that kind of thing. And yet, by the same thing, obviously, when they decided to go into retreat, they knew that they would come out of it at some point, and that they would be doing something else. So it's not like it's a surprise, but nonetheless, they have an obligation. They're aware of that obligation. We also have an obligation, because the enormous sum of money, human resources, effort, aspirations, all of this, as well as the fact that there are not many places to do a long retreat in North America anymore. So we have an obligation also to future aspirants that they would be able to engage in that. And we would like that to be sufficiently normal that it would not feel like climbing Mount Everest, but rather that it's kind of normal. The more normal it is, the more normalized we make it, the more likely it is that parents will not rile against their offspring going on a 3-year retreat, even though their offspring are 40 years old. It doesn't seem to matter. And so we would like it to be normalized so that we're not continually in a state of shock that it happened, or constantly fantasizing about things that are unrealistic. Just like we all come here and meditate together, for most of us, this is a normalized affair. We come and sit together, we practice together, we ask questions, we talk about the Dharma, we learn. It's normalized. It's not something fantastic, except in the sense that it's really fantastic from the perspective of holding the views and the teachings of the Dharma that we know about and that we study. But even that is still, it's normalized. That's what we're engaged in for this life. If it's good enough, it's for this life. So we'd like to make it normalized in that way. The retreatants would love it if everyone would turn their backs and they would just come out of the gate and, go around and go back in. Which is exactly what's going to happen. They are going to come out at a certain time. There's a ceremony that will happen inside. And when that ceremony is done, which takes about 3 hours, but we won't be there for that, they will come out, circumambulate, and there will be an opportunity to see them, and they will then go back into their cloister for one more night inside of the cloister. The gates will be closed and locked again, and they're on the schedule again. But they've just had a big kind of pimple. They came out and it was like, whoa, what was that? And now they're going back in. So obviously their sleep is not going to be the same as it was before. And the following day, the retreat will open again and it will not close. It will just be opened. So yes, there's some trials along there. So we have some things that we've talked with the retreatants about. One is we would like to offer a place for them to come and meditate with us. But really, ideally, just come in and sit down and meditate so that it's normalized. And there's every one of them, without a single exception, breathed such a sigh of relief. The idea that they could come and just sit and nobody would even know who they were. Because this is actually a fault in our practice, that we identify with who we are. We're always talking about the issues with identification, with ego and all of that. So you can't normalize that in the sense we want to if we're continually celebrating it. So we need to bring it to the place of, this is what we do. It's what we did before and it's what we do after. And that's just what we do. So there will be no formal teachings from those people. We're thinking about a year. Which doesn't mean that you can't talk to them, that they're on 24/7 silence or something. No, actually we want to get to know them in the context of normal, not in the context of special. They're special that when they walk out of the gate, and when the gate closes that night or the next day, they're not special. It's really important. We don't need to tell them that, though some of you I'm sure will. It's not a requirement, but it's really, we want to have it kind of melded together in the way that when you bake a cake and you bring the ingredients together, you're very careful about how you mix everything. If you're not careful, the cake doesn't turn out right. So one of the things is, we will not have them lead a retreat on death and dying. That will not happen. We will not have them lead a retreat even on shamatha. But it would be nice if they sat with us and did shamatha and come to some of the retreats and so on. And little by little, we will discover who's who has what strengths, who can do what, who can't, and so on. And some of that just works its way out. Not all of them will stay here. Some will leave. Others who just heard about KCC, already we know people come because they hear about something. So that's first of all, that's the, the responsibility of the Sangha is to be very careful. Have conversations with these retreatants and treat them as ordinary, which is not to say derogatory or anything. It just means like not special. Every person, every Lama that I know has said, that I've talked to, has said it is very difficult coming out of retreat and having people make you special. And you're immediately aware that this is not a good sign. This is not good. Because if you tell people enough that they're special, they will believe they're special. And that is immediately the beginning of the end. So it's a real responsibility. It is not a fake thing to do. We really need to be very careful. So that's our responsibility to the retreatants. Their responsibility to us is to be honest, to say what it is. If they say they're going to do something, to do it. And to, generally speaking, this may sound contradictory, but I'll say anyway, to be generous with their own Dharma, which is to say, show up enough so that we get to know them, and come and go like everybody else. If there is a monk or a nun amongst them, that person may show up in robes, but that also is a challenge to them, because immediately they show up in robes, and now there'll be some people in the Sangha who feel like they're special because they have robes on. And there is a special connected with the robes, and that's one of the challenges to somebody who wears robes, is that there's a constant support to think of yourself as special, which is the downfall of monks and nuns. So we just need to understand all those pieces, and we can talk about those pieces in our open conversations, which we have regularly, and work towards this common goal of supporting ourselves, and they will do the same thing. It's interesting to think about a short list of good signs and bad signs. The truth is that you actually don't have to be practicing the Dharma and meditating to know what they are. You actually already know what they are. For example, what do you think about arrogance? Good or not good? Not so good. Humility. Better? So I think that mostly we know already what the good looks like and what it doesn't look like. And so we will also, as a Sangha, we will mature with this and learn more subtle things about what looks good and doesn't look good, and maybe some things that look good sometimes don't look good in another context, and back and forth. So jointly, we should consider this an opportunity that comes rarely. And here we are with it. It's also an obligation. And so we can embrace that with some joy and put the effort into it that's required along the way. It's also okay, even though the retreatants have already been, we've already talked about this with the retreatants, about as much as we just now finished doing. And one of the natural questions was, is it okay to talk to people? I mean, I suppose that's a reasonable question. But to say no would not be a particularly reasonable answer. So when you explore these things, then you have to go to the extremes in order to see what is useful and not useful. Obviously, it's not useful to have people who never speak with anyone. So, and if you've been in a retreat for 3 years, you're not actually sure what's useful anymore. So the suggestion that we've already given them is, yeah, you should speak with people. And if they ask for something like, for example, somebody comes to the center, not uncommon, and they will say, what is this refuge thing? What does that mean? So generally we would say, it's okay from the retreatant's perspective. You can say what refuge is. Do not give a formal teaching, like there's a title in a schedule that says this person is going to give a formal teaching on refuge. Something like refuge, pretty much they should all be able to explain what refuge is at this point without it going off the rails in some strange direction. But if it does go off the rails, then at least we are working with something that, we'll have to deal with those things along the way. So to ask a question in the Dharma is good. The retreatants have been asked, if people ask for advice on their relationships, which is totally common, ask them to go back and reconsider their question. And in the same way, question of, what kind of a car should I buy? Sort of in the same genre. It's interesting how many, people do ask those things because they feel concerned or they feel some sense of uncertainty about what will be helpful for both the person who's asking the question and for others. So it's important to be able to answer, but it's okay to have an answer like, I've actually been asked to not discuss those things. Like, for example, teachings that were only given on the 3-year retreat, they're asked like, do not discuss these things. So some will. That's a problem. That's a problem. It's a problem largely because one of the great pitfalls that we can find written in many great texts, one of the great pitfalls and one of the worst things that we can do to each other as a Sangha, making an effort to encourage ourselves and others to engage in the practices, one of the worst things you can do is something that would make someone feel that the Dharma wasn't worth practicing. And one way to do that is to give someone a teaching that they can't practice, that they don't know enough about that particular practice in order to engage in it fruitfully. So after they've tried it for a while, they come to the conclusion, I already did that, it's nothing. Doesn't work. When actually what happened was they didn't get all the pieces and they didn't understand all the pieces. So they didn't know how to put the thing together so that it would work for them. And so they've basically been inadvertently cheated by something unskillful, given instructions that were a little bit too much for them to master, and the result is the Dharma actually isn't what it looks like. So we expect that the retreatants will follow that particular injunction quite seriously, because they're all fully aware of the importance of not spreading those teachings, especially the ones that they themselves couldn't even quite grasp at the end of 3 years. To go out and spread those things is a real misfortune. So I say that not because I think they're going to do that, or because anyone here would even necessarily notice that it had been done, But because we have to watch each other and care for each other in this process, we just need to keep our eyes and ears open, not because we're spies or trying to figure out what other people are doing wrong, because there isn't anybody who hasn't screwed things up. So we need to expand our circle of caring for each other. And when the retreatants are here and when they come out of the gate, we need to keep that in mind. It's a fragile process. It was in the beginning, it still is, it'll be all the way to the end. So I think that's all that I have today. Did I miss anything? Aside from being shorter.
I think you did it.
Pat. Yep.
Oh, need the microphone. Can someone need the microphone? Where the stream is. Would it, will there be a specific place that the retreatants, when they come to KCC, sit? I doubt if they'd sit where you guys are, but would there be a designated spot?
That's a great question. It's a great question. And I think the answer is no, there's no special spot. In other words, this is what we mean by normalize. And it's not permanence, you know, it's like, I like to think when I sit down here that the problem is that I'm a fraud. So it's a nice thing to identify with in a kind of light way, because frankly, I find it impossible to be perfect. So it's not dishonest to myself to say, you know, don't forget, you're sitting here looking like you're somebody that you aren't. It's helpful. You know, it's not like a fake criticism of some kind. It's more like, who isn't doing that like pretty much all the time? The Buddha? Yeah, maybe that. It's like, you know, it's like we unintentionally manipulate each other. We shade things continuously. We're always doing that, and it's not bad, but it's good if we notice it. So, yeah, I think it's really we have to be careful. Yes, somebody coming from long retreat, whether it's from the retreat we just completed or some other long retreat, and expects to get a special seat, I don't think Khenpo Rinpoche would even say, hey, this seat is not special enough. You know, it's like, it's not a good sign. If somebody comes, where is my seat? No, I don't sit with everybody else. There's something wrong there. Again, normalize. We want to normalize it. Like somebody could come in here and have no idea. There could be 6 people who are enlightened here. It could be everyone who's enlightened, and it wouldn't be noticeable to anyone.
I just want to just corroborate all of this. There are others here who finished the 1-year retreat, and that was less than 1/3 of what these folks have gone through. It was quite difficult to step out of there, and Lama Michael gave us this advice, which was so helpful. Just come in the back, sit there, and be normal, and as normal as you can be. And then don't do any committee work or anything for 6 months. And I will say 6 months felt too short, because the whole world is so astonishing, after you've no cell phone, no news, no TV, no talking to 6 people in your cloister. So, yeah, I just want to say I felt very welcomed back, and I felt like people were very careful about not pressing. But you're just dealing with so much your own self, trying not to ruin the little bit you got. So I just want to say that's really how we can help. Yeah. And thank you. I want to say thank you so much for everybody who's made these retreats possible. Oh my gosh.
One thing that I would add, expand on just a little bit, is the aspect of what happens after retreat. There's a certain way where we think, well, the retreat is over. But just as anything else in our life, there isn't anything that we do that does not create some kind of momentum. And in the case of retreat, it's really important to allow that momentum to carry on, and the continued evolution of whatever's in transformation that kind of opened up for. And I remember after Dora and I came out of, we finished 1-year retreat, and at that time Lama Tashi was here, and he turned to us and he said, "You won't know what you've done for at least a year." So, and that it turned out to be good advice. It's if you're on retreat and you create a lot of energy and momentum in practice, and things just keep on unfolding. So it's one of the things that we can do is to allow space for that unfolding to continue, and not grab people and start up where we left off, because it never works anyway. But in this case, it's particularly kind of a humorous thing to consider, and it'll actually allow space for people to find out what they've actually done. With 3-year retreat, it might take more than a year. I don't know. In certain ways, I think I'm still discovering it 20 years later. So that's one thing that, so it is a lot like, you mentioned the image of the seed, Michael, and they all have planted a seed, and we shouldn't get in the way of that continuing to grow. So being friendly, and connecting, but not placing burdens on people to be something. We've changed also, hopefully. So.
So you said that they were going to have the title of Lama. Do we address them?
Oh yeah, I see it.
Do we address them that way, Lama so-and-so, when they come? You said that they would have that title.
They'll
when
have
they
what?
The title of Lama. I'm just wondering, how do we address them when we see them?
You know that, I'm not sure that I got your whole question there, so let me.
Call them Lama.
Oh, I see, okay. The tradition is like this, and you have to be a little bit kind of soft with it. It's not hard, but I have heard a number of times at the end of retreat that the retreatants all get the title Lama. But how that is dealt with following that is like there's a broad range of ways that one works with that. back to the signs. Good sign. Don't use the title. Bad sign. Use the title and request others to use the title also in referencing myself. Bad sign. No, it's really, so there's a certain interesting play here that happens. Somebody comes to sit with us here, whether they are a truly highly realized person or somebody who's just beginning, we have a relationship. It's the truth of interdependence. Of course, you have a relationship with them the moment you see them. You don't know anything about them. And then you're having a conversation, and along the way, you've asked, somebody has introduced you to them, and you've heard their name. And maybe their name is a Dharma name. So many of the retreatants decided somewhere along the way during the retreat to use their Dharma name, and they were encouraged to do that. Not necessarily to eschew or put aside their given name from their parents, but rather to like, okay, you got two names, and or three. It's like whatever the circumstance is, you use something that's the skillful thing to use in that situation. If you're talking to your parents, it's not always skillful to say, I'm sorry, I've changed my name. I don't like the one you gave me. This is not going to be helpful. So, you know, sometimes you learn these things the hard way. But it's also nice, you know, when you meet a Tibetan teacher of some kind, they often like to hear the Dharma name in Tibetan. It makes them feel comfortable. So sometimes we might use that and use our given name from our parents. And there's no rule there. Some people change their name and never go back. They just use their Tibetan Dharma name. And others do other things. So I would say, I'll give one example of one teacher who I had a fairly long connection with, and still do, but it's not very active. And he said when his students came out on a long retreat, he said, like is common, you have the title Lama. I will likely never in this lifetime use that to refer to you. And, you know, that's kind of shocking in one way. On the other hand, some people said, that was the biggest relief in my life. Like maybe I could just hide and never have to do that. Because anyone who's got any wherewithal about it has to know that title contains an enormous responsibility. You are responsible for everything that happens to the person who takes you as a teacher. Everything. You could say, well, don't they have some responsibility? That's their business. Yours is that everything that you play into, you're fully responsible for. And some of the things are even more than that, responsible for what goes on beyond this life. If you don't take it seriously, what Kala Rinpoche used to say is, actually it wasn't Kala Rinpoche, it was Bokha Rinpoche who said, you're cheating sentient beings. If you don't take the full responsibility, you're cheating sentient beings. So better never use the title and just, hide out behind the normal. In time, you will be found out. So you never should have done a retreat. That's the problem. Then no one would ever ask in the first place. On the other hand, it's kind of natural and normal to think because we have this aspiration that we call bodhicitta. We have the aspiration to accomplish the Dharma in order to benefit all sentient beings. Now, most of us, when we start that, and for at least a decade or two, we have the sense of, I don't see how you get there with this. I'm trying, but I'm continually irritating people and like running into all sorts of problems and, calling and saying, I need another interview, I'm in trouble, and so on. But in time, if you stick with it, you come to the place of seeing, oh, I see what has to happen here. And then you know what you need to do. And it probably is something that you need to do for about another 30 years. But that is the path. So it's not like you can say to someone, you can't ever use the word Lama. But I think that before you use the word Lama to speaking to the retreatants, you need to hear that word from others who reference you in that way, even after they've been discouraged from using it. Because their sense of the relationship and the help that you're getting from somebody is so strong they can't not use it. Tricky, huh? Just like growing up. I mean, you got the infant stage, and you don't yet know that there's something out there called adolescence. So, what else? They're not going to be here for, a little while, so it's go have a beer.
I have a quick question. What about who was the teachers before? I'm here. What about who was a teacher before? So that went to retreat and then...
What about who was a teacher before?
Yeah, some of the retreatants were teachers. I mean, you guys. Like Julia was a teacher.
Yeah.
So she had a lot of students before. I don't know, what do you have to do with
No,
that?
I think that is a great question.
Isn't it?
What did I just miss?
And then I have to add something else. I went through school and I went through a PhD, and then after that it didn't come out to anything. So it can happen that people go for 3 years study and then come up and go and do something else.
That's exactly
That's pretty
right.
normal. So
Absolutely.
and I
Yeah.
don't really care if people know that I have it or not. It doesn't
Yeah.
really matter.
Yeah. But I think in this case, there's no particular expectation generally that the person who did a long retreat teach the Dharma. In fact, one could say, somebody says, I decided to go and do something totally different. There's nothing wrong with that. There's no implied expectation. There is an implied hope, which you might say, hopefully, a light expectation that this person will act in accordance with the ethical standards of the tradition. Treat people fairly and honestly, act kindly, help others, focus on the benefit of others more than on your own benefit. Like, try to do those things. It doesn't mean that you go and teach the Dharma, but if you do those things, you are teaching by example. And it may not be the example that the Dalai Lama sets, but that doesn't mean that it's not positive. Lots of, I think kind of unfortunately, and much to the chagrin of many of our teachers, that some of the young tulkus who are found end up leaving their implied and hoped for position and training behind and go off and do something else. It's not uncommon, maybe more common today than it used to be, for sure. And I think it's clear it's disappointing to many of the higher teachers that it's just maybe it feels a bit like we're losing too many of those who have the most promise. Still, there's nothing you can do about it. It's like it's just the karma of the situation. You encounter things, and the interconnectedness was put in place, we would say, before you were born. So things will unfold after you come into this life that you had no intention of doing or unfolding, and it can work both ways. I can tell you that I never had the intention of practicing the Dharma for the great majority of the first half of my life. If somebody said, why don't you practice the Dharma, I would never have been interested. And even when I lived in India, I remember taking a cab to a place that went right by Kala Rinpoche's monastery like 20 times in 2 years. It never occurred to me to even notice that monastery. So this is just interconnectedness, like the pieces just weren't there. And then after all that time, Sanjay Elliott invites him to come to San Francisco, and so I meet him. And then years later I discover, like, wow, I went by that place so many times. And why is this time suddenly something was different? We can't measure that. So I think it's better not to have the expectation. If we create an environment in our Sangha, not only are we more likely to get good teachers from our own retreat, but good teachers from other retreats. And people along the way who have something really special to offer. Maybe they're not really Dharma teachers, maybe they're primarily scholars. But scholars have interesting things to add to the thing too. So I think it's an issue of we need to manage ourselves in such a way that when people come to the center, they feel inspired by the example that's set. Always. That's always good. And I think we do a decent job of that. So I hope that we will continue to do that. There are many Dharma centers in this country. So just as a reason for doing what I just mentioned, there are many Dharma centers in this country. I think I could name half a dozen right now who are looking for qualified teachers to come and teach at their center. I think after 3-year retreat, most of the retreatants are leery of those kinds of commitments. But of course, you're going to do something with your life, and you may need to have an income somehow, for all sorts of reasons. It could be that some group would come and say, would you come and work for us for a while, lead this retreat, do this thing? So even that, in the case of the current batch of retreatants, we have said, do not accept those things for 1 year. So not only are we not scheduling them to do retreats and things, we don't want them to accept those things. So we can't control that. But if they decide to accept it, and it appears they've accepted it prematurely, we might say, well, we've been saved having to look at that person as a possible teacher at this center. I have often said, and I know Bill and I have discussed it on occasion, there's 2 things about being a teacher. And I like to say first, the most dangerous thing you can do in career as a Dharma practitioner is to teach the Dharma because of the responsibility with it. On the other hand, teaching the Dharma means you have to think about it more than when you're not teaching them. You can be really lazy when you're just doing it yourself. You don't need to worry about anybody saying like, you really didn't explain that well. So it's not important. Nobody heard it. But once other people hear it, you also hear it, and you hear back, and now it's too late. And the result is that because if you're going to teach, you have to be more careful, more skillful than otherwise, and that actually is a benefit then. So it can come full circle, but people can also really create a lot of problems before they make that discovery, which is unfortunate. So this again is why we're asking the retreatants, like, you gotta be really careful. And also as a Sangha, we have to be really careful about all of that. See how good a job we can do in requesting them to do a good job also for us. Well, any more? I see 3 fingers, but I can't see whose they are.
I am standing.
Oh.
I feel that this question's a bit silly, but when the 3-year retreat was about to close, in other words, they were about to go into it, we had a lot of katas and gave them the katas, and they gave them back, and all kinds of wonderful stuff like that.
Can you speak up just a little louder?
Sure. Sorry about that. How's this?
Good.
Okay.
For me, it's good anyway.
All right. When the 3-year retreat closed, in other words, they went into the cloister,
Yes.
we offered them katas and had a celebration.
Yeah.
And toward the end of that, I have now like 4 katas, one of which is supposed to be dedicated to one of the retreatants. And will we have an opportunity to offer them katas, or is this going to be they come out, they go in, and we say
Yeah.
bye?
Yeah. Yeah, good. Thank you. That definitely. So let's you have to kind of go back and forth with this in order to get get the needle to land in the right place. It's like this is a celebration out at SCOL when they come out. There's no doubt about it. We're not going to say to them, be humble, don't be arrogant and all of that. Well, this is fantastic, you finished it, but don't ever say that. It's like, it's separated by a couple of 100 miles, so we could say it's a celebration, and it will be a big celebration, and there'll be some commemorations, and Khenpo Rinpoche will probably have some things to say. It's very important to honor the fact that people committed this time to that effort. And at the same time, this is why before even today happened, already we've had conversations with them. So when it's done, this is what's going to happen. Now, I don't know what's going on in their minds, but it appears that they would prefer to not be noticed. Like if they could come out and be invisible, they're thinking that would be really nice. Actually, I don't think it would be nice. I think that's a fear of being noticed, which is not equivalent to something else. It's just a fear of too much attention and too much energy when you've been with just a few people and for so long and through many intense situations, and now there's going to be who knows how many people. Almost for sure at least 100, but day by day it looks like it could be more like 300 and possibly more. So For that reason, even the Oregonian called and asked if they could have somebody come out and look. Well, we've had that before. They were here when the one-year retreat went in, and they did publish something. So it's a different person. The religious editor is somebody different now, but I'm the one who talked to them. I think somebody else did too, and I said, you make sure you tell them they cannot come out and tell the actual opening. In other words, we're not going to have an interview before the event is completed. And partly that was self-defense, like we don't want something published before it actually happens, which then we have 500 people, you know, and actually no real benefit in all of that. But it's fine, you know, it's like something gets published, it's okay. So far we haven't seen anything negative. We haven't managed to create a scandal around ourselves, you know. Crossed fingers. Still time. Still time. Yeah. So,
Hi.
yes, on the katas, yes, there will be an opportunity to exchange gifts or whatever, a kata, for example. That's already already part of the ceremony. So for those of you who don't know, kata is a white scarf, a traditional scarf that you can get. There'll be lots of them there, and normally they're sold for $5 or something. And that kata then you give to the retreatant, and we'll go over that out there when that ceremony is happening. And so in this kind of an event, often you end up with an enormous amount of white. These kind of silk katas. And then we wrap them up and use them at another time again. So there will be that. Just once. Yeah.
I just finished my question, and then you. I was just wondering, on a practical level, should we avoid asking them about the retreat?
You can ask them about the retreat, but
okay.
But if they tell you anything about it, I'd like to hear about that. So, I mean, so of course, if you ask about the retreat, they're not going to tell you much about it. What are they going to be able to say? Did you have a nice time? Is that, I mean, what was it, fun?
In short, how were the last 3 years of your life?
I think most of them would probably say, yeah, it's all of that, just like real life. It's actually inside there is just like outside. When you're outside, you can't see that. When you're inside, you see those things. And when you're outside, then you see again how it's just like real life. So not much to say is my thought on it. And they really shouldn't say much. And because of that, I would advise, if you want to ask something, which is totally okay, think about the question. Think about the question. Think about the question so that you're not actually asking something of them that they probably shouldn't be talking about. So you could ask them, for example, was the food good? I could already tell you about that, but we'll let that go. I mean, mostly The staff, you can see the staff out there, and they got very exhausted about 3 or 4 months ago, and in the last couple of months they got very excited, and they're like doing many extra things and feeling excited now, which is good because it's a lot of work. But I think one could ask a question. I remember somebody asking me, can you tell me one thing that would be interesting to hear?
We've heard lots of interesting stories about your retreat.
I mean, it's like people want to talk to somebody. It is kind of like, is this person weird or not? Well, obviously they're weird because they did this thing, and I never would have done that, so they're not like me, certainly. So I get to talk to this person sort of like, if I was introduced to a baboon, maybe. So, but actually, they're just all the rest of us, which is, again, automatically normalized in a certain way, which is partly why they come out of the gates and they walk around. When they come out of the gate, actually, technically, the moment the door opens and they start to come out, the retreat is, at that time, finished. It doesn't really finish then, because there's more kind of ceremony, but it is the point at which it's done. They will not receive more teaching. They will not be required. They are out of our control. They may or may not go back in for the evening, which they're supposed to do, and spend one more night in the cloister. But given all sorts of circumstances, with arrangements with parents and friends and things that they didn't fully understand in every case, some of them may not be there. But it's better to follow it through to the very end and feel that sense of completion from it, I think. I don't know what they'll say. I mean, I really suggest don't ask them for any kind of teaching of any kind whatsoever, because if you manage to convince them to say something, they're already compromising something that they've been asked not to do, and they know why they're not supposed to do it. So it's just better not go there. A welcome is nice, Nice to meet you, nice to see you again, that sort of thing. And maybe you'll come by the Sangha and meditate with us. Some kind of aspiration like that would be nice. Anyway, that's my opinion.
Your point that you should think about the question that you're asking, I think that's an important thing. Even not too many, now Dora and I did retreat back in late 90s, and even a couple of years back, somebody asked me in a very kind and sincere way, "Oh, what was 1 year retreat like?" And my gears just spun kind of independently, nothing. I said, well, it was like a 1 year retreat. Because there isn't another kind of facsimile that it's like, and each one's different. So if we actually just think about the conversation that we want to have, and I think the question was asked very sincerely, what is a 1 year retreat like? But if we actually have something that we're really interested in, we should think about what that is, and think about the bite-size question that actually addresses that. Otherwise, stick to things like, what was the food like? What was the daily schedule like? Did it take a while to get used to getting up that early in the morning? There are all kinds of small details.
Yeah.
That will, and then from the detail, the conversation can unfold in a very natural way. Much easier than going for the global investigation.
Alan, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm
Is that okay, or do we need to finish?
corrupting your plans. What's happening? Is Alan on? Okay, it'll just be that many, yeah, and we'll make it reasonably short.
I'll be very quick then. I was just sitting here pondering what you said about not carrying expectations of people as they come out of retreat, that they might become teachers or that we should get something from them right away. And I realized as I looked at it that I'm carrying a whole bunch of other expectations about the people I knew and knew well before they went into retreat. And I'm so appreciative of this discussion because it's really inspired me just to hold the wish that I might meet them fresh when they come out.
Yeah.
Because I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, and for certain they're not either. And
Yeah.
we're still connected, but I can imagine it would be pretty scary to be walking back into all of those, even the ordinary expectations around human relationship.
So it's good, huh? I mean, how many times do you get the chance to meet the same person fresh again? Every day. But we can't quite open ourselves to that. So it's nice occasionally when you're sort of forced into it. You think you don't know who the person is, and it might be true.
I wanted to thank you for mentioning the staff, because they've been on 3-year retreat also in a very different way, and it's been incredibly intense for them, and they've held this whole commitment. Do we treat them tenderly also in the same careful way, the staff people?
I'm sorry, I got a sound out of the side and I couldn't hear the last thing you said.
You're making me think that it would be a good idea to be tender with the staff and allow them some careful reentry time and things like that also.
Yeah.
And offer them a whole bunch of gratitude.
Oh yeah. I mean, this is, when Khenpo Rinpoche is there, he'll be very big on gratitude. Gratitude to the retreatants for doing it, and to the staff also, and the retreatants, of course, generally speaking, get more than enough accolades, and the staff, on the other hand, tends to disappear. And their work was, in most ways, not less than what the retreatants did. And how they did things and how they didn't do things, all of those things played a role in how the retreat unfolded for people and their experience of the retreat. And I think they did I don't know what word to use, because there's so little, generally speaking, there is so little attention paid to the staff. I think this was not entirely the case in this retreat, but partly that's true because of the number of people who were there who had done maybe not a very long retreat, but weeks and months and so on, that you get firsthand experience with how the staff tend to be taken for granted. So we made a special effort, Lama Tara and I, if she was here, the other teacher of the retreat, we made a special effort to meet regularly with the staff, though most of the time it was over a meal. But over the meal was where most of the interface with the staff occurred, with some exception just recently. It's so important that they leave the retreat feeling good about what happened. And it's my experience from them at this point in time that they all feel that really kind of in a strong way. And one of the reasons why it's important is that if you want retreats to happen in the world, you need staff. And if you ruin your staff, that's what other people hear. And so then it becomes difficult to find good people to do the things that need to be done to support retreats, short retreats and long retreats. So I think generally speaking, when we do a retreat, even if it's a day, a week, a month, whatever it is, it's really important to support the staff, or you will lose them. You will not only lose the ones who are there now doing the work by virtue of the things that they tell other people, you'll lose the ones you might have had. So this is all just the simple truth of interconnectedness. You wondered what that meant? This is it. so it's really important to do that, just like it is with each other. When we're practicing, it's like it's really important to honor the effort that people put into supporting others and engaging in the practice. It cannot be said enough. Alan, you get the last word. Well, you can have more than one.
Hopefully you will have the last word. I have heard a few things that are making it difficult for me to understand the logistics of what is going to, of how the opening is going to unfold. Let me say, I'm fine with however it's going to happen, and I'm prepared to go with whatever the flow is. However, I need to explain some of this also to the son of one of the retreatants who is planning to come, who doesn't understand many of the things that we sitting here do. So I heard that the retreatants are going to come out and circumambulate the cloister, and then they're going to go back in. I also heard...
Not quite in that short a... There's more in there.
Oh, they will be out for a while.
Yes.
Okay.
Sort of.
So then I also heard that there will be an opportunity for people to offer katas to the retreatants, which I assume happens during that undefined interim period there.
Yeah.
Then I also know that the retreatants were asked to designate certain close family members or whomever who they would like to have some personal visitation time with, who will then be allowed to go in and visit them in their cabins.
Yes.
So that is the plan then.
Yes.
And only designated people will go in and...
The official answer is yes, that's true. But you know, it's not possible to be that precise. So for example, if somebody, first of all, there's 3 or 4 of us who know or recognize virtually everybody who would want to go and see the retreatants. What the idea is that we asked for names, specific names for people, so that we could say honestly and avoid being too officious about it, that people who have a previous connection of some kind would like to go in and see, whether it's a parent or a friend or whatever, but they have a connection of some kind. We would like them to be able to go in and spend a short time with a retreatant. And in that time, they could have a chair in there and sit down and have a conversation of a few minutes. And that time will be limited in general for all the retreatants during the period when others can go in. The others who go in will be taken to the person who they want to see, whose name we already have. If there aren't very many people who do that, it'll be possible to be a little more loose about it and possibly even have a little longer. But it's also possible that we need to say, like on my retreat, I remember we had like about 45 minutes. And people just went into the cloister and walked around, and they'd find who they were looking for. But that was a radically different situation. And here, we would like to have the people who come to see the retreatant to not just be someone who's a curiosity seeker, that it's somebody who has reason to do it. But we can't quite know that we have the complete list. And so there is a possibility that in a quick conversation with somebody, we would understand that this person really has a connection with that person, and so they would be led into the cloister. I mean, it's kind of awful to think that somebody would have gone all the way out there to see someone in particular, thinking that they could see that person, and then to be told, no, you can't. It's against the rules. And so we have a situation that we really don't want to get into. But after the meetings with the retreatants, then everyone who's not a retreatant there will leave. And the retreatants will remain there in the cloister until the following day. That's the plan, and that's what we've been telling them. Is that? No, right?
It's okay with me. I still. It's fine.
I think we're going to have to wait till it's all written down,
Yeah.
and then it will be real clear.
Yeah, and it's not all written down yet. I mean, we got together with half a dozen people, and we marched through the thing, and we marched around the cloister, and to just see how, make sure everything was working right. But still, there's quite a few situations that are not clear. And we can't be entirely clear until Kempo Rinpoche is here. It's like there's enough ifs and buts in his coming that we won't be certain until it actually happens, or very close to that. But that's okay, I think. He's not going to ruin it, I don't think. Maybe the best laid plans become better laid plans. I don't know. Okay. Yep. There it is.
By this virtue may I quickly realize Mahamudra and establish all beings without exception in this state.